The morning I realized my family was planning to erase me didn't start with a scream or a slap. It started with a chair missing at the table. Thanksgiving morning, the house smelled like roasted turkey and cinnamon. The kind of smell that's supposed to mean safety, belonging. I stood in the doorway of my parents' dining room holding a casserole dish that was already cooling in my hands and counted the chairs without thinking. One for my father, one for my mother, one for my older sister, one for my brother-in-law, one for my grandmother, none for me. They'd pushed my chair against the wall, half hidden behind the china cabinet, like an afterthought they hoped no one would notice. I was 31 years old. I owned my own condo. I had just been promoted at work after years of grinding in silence. And somehow in that room I was still optional. Oh, my mother said lightly when she saw me standing there. You can just grab a seat in the kitchen, sweetheart. We're tight on space. Sweetheart, the word landed like a bruise. My sister Claire didn't even look up from her phone. Her manicured fingers tapped out a message while her diamond wedding band caught the light. She was smiling at something on the screen, probably one of the family group chats I'd been quietly removed from months earlier. My father cleared his throat. Let's sit down. Food's getting cold. No one argued. No one noticed me backing out of the room, my casserole untouched. In the kitchen, I set the dish on the counter and leaned against the sink. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. I stared at my reflection in the microwave door and tried to remind myself of something I'd learned the hard way. Don't react, not yet. This wasn't new, it was just clearer. Growing up, I'd been the easy child, the quiet one, the one who didn't cause scenes or demand attention. Claire was 3 years older, beautiful, loud, and always performing. She learned early that affection in our house was a currency, and she mastered the exchange. I learned to survive without it. At birthdays, Claire got parties. I got cards. At Christmas, she got jewelry. I got sweaters that were always a size too big. When she forgot my birthday one year, my mother laughed and said, "Well, you never make a fuss anyway." She was right, I didn't. But that morning, standing alone in the kitchen while my family laughed in the other room, something shifted. A small, sharp thought slid into place. They weren't just ignoring me anymore, they were preparing. The clink of silverware drifted through the doorway. My grandmother's voice rose pleased and theatrical. "So, have you two decided yet?" "Decided what?" my father asked. Claire answered quickly. "The house. We're thinking it makes the most sense if we move in sooner rather than later." My grip tightened on the edge of the counter. The house. My parents' house sat on a quiet street lined with old trees and older money. It was the house we all grew up in. The house I'd assumed foolishly would be discussed, considered, divided fairly someday. My mother hummed approvingly. "It would be nice to know it stays in the family." "It will," Claire said, obviously. Obviously. I waited for someone to say my name. No one did. Later, while they ate dessert, my mother finally wandered into the kitchen. She stopped short when she saw me still there. "Oh, are you sulking?" I looked up slowly. I didn't have a chair. She waved a hand dismissively. "You're too sensitive. We didn't mean anything by it." I studied her face. Perfect hair, soft smile. The same woman who taught me how to bake cookies and how to disappear at the same time. "Are you giving Claire the house?" I asked. Her expression flickered. "Just for a second." "We're talking about options," she said carefully. "It's practical. You're independent. You've always been fine on your own." That was her favorite justification. "You don't need us." "And me?" I asked. "Am I part of the conversation?" She sighed like I was exhausting her. "Why do you always make things difficult?" I almost laughed. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just nodded and said, "Okay." That night, I lay awake in my childhood bedroom, staring at the cracks in the ceiling I'd memorized years ago. The house was quiet, but my mind wasn't. I thought about every time I'd shown up when no one else did. When my mother was sick and I took time off work. When my father needed help with paperwork and Claire was too busy. When family emergencies were handled quietly without praise. I'd mistaken being useful for being valued. That was my first mistake. The second came a week later when my father called and asked me to stop by his office. He worked for a regional construction firm. A modest title, decades of loyalty. He sounded tired on the phone. "I need to talk to you about something," he said. "Alone." I arrived after work, still in my blazer, still carrying the weight of the week. His office smelled like dust and old coffee. The blinds were half closed, the light thin and gray. He gestured for me to sit. "Your mother and I are updating our estate plans," he said. I waited. "We've decided Claire will handle the family assets when we're gone." There it was. And me, I asked, even though I already knew. He shifted in his chair. You're capable. You'll land on your feet. Claire needs more support. I stared at him. She married into money. That doesn't mean. I've been helping you for years, I said quietly. With your work, with the house, with Mom. He looked away. This isn't about fairness, it's about peace. Peace. That word was always used when someone else was paying the price. I stood slowly. Thank you for being honest. He frowned. Don't be dramatic. I smiled then, not because I felt okay, but because something inside me hardened into clarity. They had chosen, and if they were rewriting the future without me, then I would stop waiting for permission to write my own. I didn't know yet how the tables would turn. I didn't know how deep the betrayal would go. And I definitely didn't know how far I'd be willing to go to protect what was mine. But as I walked out of that office and into the cold evening air, one truth settled in my bones. I wasn't being excluded by accident. I was being erased on purpose, and I would remember that. Because the quiet daughter they overlooked was about to become the one they never saw coming. I didn't confront anyone after my father's office. That surprised even me. For 3 days, I moved through my life like nothing had changed. I went to work. I answered emails. I smiled at coworkers who congratulated me again on my recent promotion. I folded laundry. I paid bills. I let the quiet do its work. Because silence, when used correctly, is not weakness, it's preparation. The truth was, my family didn't know me anymore. Maybe they never had. They still thought of me as the girl who stayed late to wash dishes while Claire showed off her engagement ring. The one who listened instead of spoke. The one who didn't challenge decisions because challenging required energy I never had the luxury to waste. They never asked how I'd managed to rise in a company that quietly devoured people like me. They never asked what I'd learned by watching power move behind closed doors. They never asked who I'd become once I stopped asking for approval. At work, I was no one's afterthought. I worked for a mid-sized real estate development firm based downtown. On paper, I was operations director. In practice, I was the person who fixed everything no one else wanted to touch. Delayed permits, budget overruns, contractors who thought intimidation was leadership. 6 months earlier, the board had promoted me after a project everyone else had written off turned profitable under my management. No press release, no applause, just a quiet meeting and a new title. I didn't tell my family. They wouldn't have listened. That Friday, I stayed late long after the office lights dimmed. I was reviewing acquisition files when an email popped up from our legal department. Subject line estate advisory request. I frowned. The sender was a junior associate named Mark. We'd crossed paths a few times, usually when something was already on fire. The email was short, just flagging this in case it comes up. Your firm name appeared in a preliminary inquiry tied to a private family trust. No action required yet, but worth knowing. Attached was a document with redacted names. I almost didn't open it. Almost. When I did, my pulse slowed in a way that made me uneasy. The trust was connected to my parents. Not finalized, not filed, but structured. Assets outlined. Property transfers mapped. Claire listed as primary beneficiary, her husband named as trustee. My name didn't appear once, not as beneficiary, not as backup, not even as a courtesy mention. I stared at the screen for a long time, my reflection faint in the dark glass. So that was the plan. Not just exclusion, replacement. They weren't just giving Claire the house, they were giving her control, authority, a story where she was the responsible daughter and I was the one who didn't need anything. I closed the file and leaned back in my chair. For the first time since Thanksgiving, anger crept in. Not loud or explosive, focused, precise. They had mistaken my independence for permission. I packed my bag and left the office, the city cold and bright around me. On the drive home, my phone rang. My mother. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a text. Call me when you get a chance. Family dinner Sunday. Important. Important. I replied with one word. Okay. Sunday came faster than I expected. I arrived at my parents' house just after 6. Claire's car was already there, parked in my usual spot. I parked on the street and took a breath before going inside. The table was set again. This time there was a chair for me. That should have felt like progress. It didn't. Claire greeted me with a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. She'd changed her hair lighter now, softer, like she was auditioning for a version of herself she wanted everyone to believe in. Hey, she said, you look tired. I smiled back, busy. Dinner started politely. Too politely. My father cleared his throat twice before finally speaking. We wanted to talk to you about the future, he said. My mother reached for her wine glass. Claire folded her hands like she was about to pray. I waited. We're making some changes, my mother said, and we want to be transparent. That word again. Claire jumped in. We just want what's best for everyone. I looked at her. Then say it. Silence stretched. Finally, my father said, We've decided Claire will take over managing the family assets. It simplifies things. And me, I asked. My mother smiled tightly. You're strong. You've always been self-sufficient. We thought you'd understand. There it was, the same justification polished and repeated. I nodded slowly, and the trust. My father blinked. What trust? I watched their faces carefully. My mother's eyes flicked to Claire for just a fraction of a second. I leaned back in my chair. The one you're setting up, with Claire as beneficiary and her husband as trustee. The room went still. Claire laughed too quickly. What are you talking about? I saw the preliminary structure, I said calmly. It's not filed yet. My mother's lips parted. How would you? It doesn't matter, I said gently. What matters is that you were planning it without telling me. My father's voice sharpened. Are you spying on us now? I held his gaze. No, I was informed. Claire's smile vanished. By who? I shrugged. Someone who pays attention. My mother set her glass down with a soft clink. This is exactly why we didn't want drama. Drama. I almost admired the audacity. I'm not here to fight, I said. I just want clarity. Claire leaned forward. You're overreacting. It's just paperwork. Paperwork decides who has power, I said. And who doesn't. My father stood abruptly. Enough, this is our decision. I stood too. I understand, I said. Just know this. They all looked at me. You're making choices based on who you think I am, I continued. Not who I actually am. My mother scoffed. And who do you think you are? I smiled slow and deliberate. Someone who won't be invisible anymore. I left before anyone could respond. That night, I sat alone in my condo, lights off, city glowing beyond the windows. I opened my laptop and pulled up files I hadn't touched in years. Old notes, contacts, records. I wasn't planning revenge. Not yet. I was planning protection. Because if they were willing to erase me quietly, I needed to be ready for what came next. And something told me this wasn't the end of the conversation. It was the opening move. What I didn't know yet was that Claire had already made one fatal mistake. She'd underestimated how dangerous it is to overlook the person who knows where all the bodies are buried. And she'd just given me a reason to stop staying quiet. Monday morning, I woke before my alarm. That alone told me everything. When your body wakes you up before your mind is ready, it means something is wrong, or something important is about to surface. I lay still, staring at the ceiling of my condo, listening to the distant hum of traffic and the soft tick of the clock on my nightstand. My family thought Sunday night was a confrontation. For me, it was confirmation. They weren't improvising. They were executing a plan they'd rehearsed long before Thanksgiving, long before my father ever called me into his office. The trust paperwork, the timing, the way Claire spoke like the decision had already been socially approved. They didn't just exclude me. They erased me with intention. I showered, dressed, and went to work like any other day. I didn't bring the conversation up to anyone. I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't spiral. Instead, I did what I'd always done best. I observed. At the office, things moved fast. Phones rang. Emails stacked up. Meetings blurred together. By noon, I'd already resolved 2 issues that would have taken anyone else a week. The truth was, I thrived under pressure. Always had. During lunch, I walked 2 blocks to a small cafe I'd been going to for years. Same table by the window, same order. The owner waved at me without asking what I wanted. Routine grounded me. Halfway through my sandwich, my phone buzzed with a notification from LinkedIn. Claire had updated her profile. I almost ignored it. Almost. Curiosity won. Her new headline read, Incoming Family Asset Manager, Trustee, Strategic Advisor. I stared at the screen. Trustee. So they weren't just planning, they were announcing. That was when it hit me. Claire didn't know what she was doing. She was stepping into a role she didn't understand with a confidence built on entitlement instead of competence. And worse, she was doing it publicly before anything was legally finalized. That wasn't confidence. That was carelessness. Back at my desk, I pulled up an internal folder I hadn't touched in months. Old compliance reviews, vendor contracts, archived communications. I wasn't looking for revenge, not yet. I was looking for leverage. Claire's husband, Evan, worked in finance. He liked to present himself as sharp, controlled, indispensable. He was also the reason Claire thought she was untouchable. Evan believed systems existed to protect people like him, They don't. They exist to protect whoever knows how to read them. 2 hours later, I found the first inconsistency. A shell consulting firm listed as a vendor on one of my father's side projects. Nothing obvious. Clean invoices, reasonable amounts, but the timing felt off. The firm's address traced back to a shared office space 2 towns over. I zoomed in. The registered agent's name made my breath catch. Evan Morrison. I sat back slowly. So that was it. Not just inheritance, not just favoritism. They weren't planning to manage assets. They were planning to move them. Quietly. Incrementally. In ways no one would question because family was involved. I checked another file. Then another. The pattern sharpened. Small transfers, advisory fees, consulting expenses tied to entities Evan controlled, all routed through accounts my father had approved years ago when he trusted his family to act in good faith. Good faith is expensive and easily exploited. By the time the office lights dimmed that evening, my hands were steady, but my chest felt tight. Not with fear, with certainty. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was fraud in progress. On my way home, my mother called again. I let it ring. A text followed. "You embarrassed us. We need to talk." I replied. "Tomorrow, after work." She responded immediately. "Fine, but don't bring your attitude." I stared at the message. They still thought tone was the problem. That night I didn't sleep much. Not because I was anxious. Because my mind was assembling pieces I'd ignored for years. Claire's sudden lifestyle upgrades. Evan's investments that never quite made sense. My mother's insistence that I stay out of financial conversations. They hadn't kept me away because I was too sensitive. They kept me away because I was too observant. The next afternoon, I arrived at my parents' house with a folder in my bag and my emotions locked down tight. Claire was already there, Evan too sitting comfortably in my father's chair like he belonged there. That was a mistake. We didn't bother with pleasantries. My mother crossed her arms. "What is this about?" I placed my bag on the table but didn't open it. "I want to understand the trust." Evan smiled thinly. "It's all legal." "I didn't say it wasn't," I replied. Claire rolled her eyes. "You're making this weird." "I'm making it precise." My father frowned. "Watch your tone." I met his gaze. "Then watch your assets." Silence fell. Evan shifted. "What exactly are you accusing us of?" I looked directly at him. "Nothing, yet." Claire laughed nervously. "This is ridiculous." "Is it?" I asked. "Because it looks like you've been preparing to move funds through advisory structures you control." Evan's smile froze. My mother's voice sharpened. "You have no proof." I finally opened my bag and slid the folder onto the table. "I have patterns." Claire's color drained as Evan flipped through the pages. "That's confidential," he snapped. "So is fraud," I said calmly. My father stood abruptly. "Enough." "No," I said. "This is the first time it's actually enough." My mother's voice dropped. "What do you want?" I looked at all of them. The family I'd spent decades protecting from discomfort, from accountability, from consequences. "I want transparency," I said, "and I want it now." Evan laughed, forced and brittle. "You think you can threaten us?" I smiled. "I think you already threatened yourselves." Claire shot to her feet. "You don't get to come in here and—" "I do," I interrupted, "because I see what you don't." They stared at me. "You think this ends with paperwork?" I continued. "It doesn't. It ends with exposure." My father looked shaken. My mother looked furious. Evan looked calculating. Claire looked afraid. "Good." As I turned to leave, my mother hissed, "You're tearing this family apart." I paused at the door. "No," I said quietly, "I'm just refusing to be torn out of it." Outside, the air felt colder, sharper. I breathed deeply, grounding myself. This wasn't revenge. Not yet. This was the moment the power shifted. And they still had no idea how much I knew, or how patient I could be when the truth was on my side. I didn't go home after leaving my parents' house. Instead, I drove. No music, no phone calls, just the low hum of tires on pavement and the familiar weight in my chest that came when something irreversible had begun. The sky was already darkening that gray-blue hour, where the world looked suspended between decisions. They thought I'd shown my hand. That was their second mistake. I pulled into the underground garage beneath my condo and sat in the car for a long moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, breathing slowly. I replayed Evan's face when he saw the documents. The way his jaw tightened, the way his eyes flicked to Claire before he said a word. That wasn't confidence. That was calculation under pressure. Which meant there was more. Inside, I kicked off my shoes, poured a glass of water, and opened my laptop. The folder I'd shown them was only a fraction of what I'd found, enough to scare them, not enough to expose them. You don't burn a bridge until you know where the fire will spread. I logged into an old email account I hadn't touched in years. One I'd created back when I was still helping my father, occasionally back when he'd forward things to me and say, just in case. Just in case had become my quiet insurance policy. Buried deep in the inbox were years of forwarded statements, approvals, and correspondence. Most of it harmless, routine, boring. Until it wasn't. I searched Evan's name. Dozens of results appeared. My pulse didn't spike, it steadied. There it was. A thread from years ago when my father had asked Evan to handle some preliminary research on consolidating assets. Evan had responded with enthusiasm, confidence, and an attachment. The attachment wasn't there anymore. But the approval was. Looks fine to me, my father had written. Proceed cautiously. Proceed cautiously. I pulled transaction records and cross-referenced dates. The shell firm Evan controlled hadn't been created recently. It had been waiting. That meant this wasn't opportunism. This was long-term intent. Claire hadn't married well by accident. She'd married strategically. And my parents, in their eagerness to keep peace and appearances, had given Evan just enough access to believe he could get away with it. And maybe he would have, if I hadn't been the daughter they forgot to lock out. The next morning, I called in sick for the first time in years. My voice sounded calm, almost cheerful. I needed a day where no one asked questions. By noon, I was sitting across from a woman named Judith in a quiet office with neutral walls and no family photos. She wasn't flashy. She didn't smile much. She didn't ask me why I was there. She just listened. Judith specialized in forensic accounting, white-collar investigations, the kind that never made headlines until everything collapsed at once. I don't want to accuse anyone, I said carefully. I want to understand what I'm looking at. She nodded. Understanding usually leads to decisions. I slid the folder across the table. Not the one I'd shown my family. The real one. She scanned it slowly, too slowly to be casual. This is layered, she said finally. Not amateur. I exhaled, so I'm not imagining it. No, she replied. You're late. The word hit harder than I expected. Late. How late, I asked. She met my eyes. Months. Maybe longer. Whoever set this up expected time to be on their side. Time. They'd assumed I wouldn't notice until it was too late. Until the trust was finalized. Until control shifted quietly and permanently. Judith closed the folder. If you want to stop this, you'll need leverage, documentation, and patience. I almost smiled. I have patience, I said. What I need is strategy. She nodded once. Then you came to the right place. That evening, my phone buzzed with a message from Claire. Can we talk just us? I stared at the screen. This was new. Claire didn't ask. She commanded or dismissed. Asking meant she was afraid. I replied, tomorrow. Public place. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Fine. We met at a cafe halfway between our condos. Neutral territory, glass walls, witnesses everywhere. Claire arrived 10 minutes late, sunglasses on despite the dim light. She slid into the chair across from me and exhaled dramatically. You really scared Mom, she said. I stirred my coffee. Good. Her lips tightened. Why are you doing this? I looked at her. Really looked. The sister I'd protected, covered for, made excuses for. Because you didn't just exclude me, I said quietly. You tried to steal from our parents. Her laugh was brittle. Evan handles finances. You don't understand how these things work. I leaned forward, then explained why the advisory firm routing fees is registered in his name. Her face drained of color. That's not, don't, I said softly. Not here, not with me. She looked around, then back at me, voice dropping. You're blowing this out of proportion. No, I replied. You're finally seeing the proportion. She crossed her arms. What do you want? There it was. I want you to stop, I said. All of it. No trust, no transfers, no asset management. She scoffed. You can't make that happen. I met her gaze. You're right, I can't. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. But the truth can, I added. Her eyes flicked toward the exit. Evan thinks he's protected, I continued. He's not. And if this goes where it's headed, Mom and Dad won't be collateral. They'll be witnesses. She swallowed. You wouldn't, she whispered. I didn't raise my voice. I already am. She stood abruptly. You're vindictive. I stayed seated. You're careless. She left without another word. That night, my mother called. I didn't answer. My father texted. We need to fix this. I replied. You had years. I sat on my couch, lights low, Judith's words echoing in my head. Whoever set this up expected time to be on their side. They were right, just not in the way they thought. Because the longer this went on, the more evidence surfaced. The deeper the paper trail grew, the more undeniable the truth became. They thought I was reacting emotionally. What they didn't see was that I was building something much more dangerous than anger. I was building a case, and soon they would realize the quiet daughter they dismissed had become the only one who could decide how this ended, for all of us. The first thing Judith taught me was this: people don't panic when they're guilty. They panic when they realize someone else understands the system better than they do. I'd always assumed exposure would be loud: courtrooms, headlines, raised voices. But what actually unraveled them was something much quieter: precision. Over the next 2 weeks, Judith and I met 3 times, always in the same unremarkable office. No names on the door, no personal photos, just clean lines and silence. She never asked why my family did what they did. She only asked how long I'd known. Longer than I admitted, I told her once. She nodded. That's common. We protect the people who hurt us because it feels safer than admitting they're capable of it. That landed deeper than I expected. I'd spent years buffering consequences for my family, explaining away Claire's spending, justifying my mother's manipulation, framing my father's avoidance as fatigue instead of fear. I told myself it was loyalty. It wasn't. It was self-erasure. The deeper Judith dug, the clearer the picture became. Evan hadn't just created shell entities. He'd positioned himself as indispensable. He handled complexities so no one else had to. He spoke confidently. He used jargon. He made questions feel like insults. And my family let him. Because he wore the right suits, married the right daughter, said the right things. By the end of the second week, Judith looked up from her screen and said, "If this goes forward, there will be consequences." I already knew. For who I asked, she didn't hesitate: everyone. That night, I sat in my condo staring at the city lights and made a decision I'd been avoiding. I wasn't going to save them anymore. Not my parents, not Claire, not even the image of the family I wished we were. I was going to save myself. The next morning, I called my father and asked to meet him alone. He sounded relieved, too relieved. We met at a diner he liked near his office, the kind of place where the coffee never cooled and the waitresses knew his name. He looked smaller than I remembered, older, tired in a way rest doesn't fix. "You didn't have to bring lawyers into this," he said as soon as we sat. I wrapped my hands around my mug. "I didn't." "Then what is this?" he asked, gesturing vaguely. "Threats, accusations." I met his eyes, its clarity. He frowned. "Your mother is distraught." "She should be," I replied evenly. "She's been avoiding reality for years." His jaw tightened. "Watch your mouth." I inhaled slowly. "You trusted Evan." "Yes." "You trusted Claire." "Yes." "You trusted me," I said, "just not enough to listen." That silenced him. "I know you wanted peace," I continued. "I know you didn't want conflict, but peace built on denial isn't peace, it's a delay." He stared into his coffee. "Evan is moving money," I said, not hypothetically, not emotionally, logistically. He shook his head. "You're mistaken." "I'm not." "You think your sister would—" "I think she already has," I said gently. He looked up sharply. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying this ends one of 2 ways," I said. Quietly, or catastrophically. His voice dropped. "You destroy this family." I didn't flinch. I didn't start this. He leaned back, studying me like I was someone new. "What do you want?" I didn't answer immediately. "I want accountability," I said finally, "and I want you to stop pretending this is about me being difficult." He rubbed his temples. "Your mother won't survive this." I swallowed. "Neither will I if it continues." That was the moment something shifted. Not in him. In me. For the first time, I wasn't negotiating my worth. I stood. "I've given you time, not protection." He reached for my arm. "Wait." I stepped back. I waited my whole life. That afternoon, Judith called. "They accelerated," she said. My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" "They started moving assets earlier than expected, smaller amounts, testing thresholds." Of course they were. They'd felt the pressure and decided to outrun it. That was their fatal error. Because systems don't forgive panic. "They think they're still ahead," Judith added. "They're not." "What happens now?" I asked. She paused. "Now we decide who controls the narrative." That evening, my mother showed up at my door unannounced. She looked nothing like the woman who hosted charity luncheons and curated family photos. Her hair was unstyled, her eyes red, her coat wrinkled. "You're doing this to punish us," she said the moment I opened the door. I stepped aside. "Come in." She hesitated, then entered, scanning my condo like it was evidence. "You've always resented us," she continued. "Claire had needs. You never did." I closed the door. "You told yourself that so you wouldn't have to show up." Her face crumpled. "We did our best." "No," I said softly. "You did what was convenient." She sank onto the couch. "You're tearing everything apart." I sat across from her. "You taught me how to disappear. This is what happens when I stop." She looked up, voice trembling. If this goes public, it will, I said. She flinched. Then what? I leaned forward. Then the truth becomes larger than your version of events. She covered her face. I never meant to hurt you. I know, I said. You just didn't care enough not to. She stayed for an hour, tried guilt, tried nostalgia, tried fear. None of it worked. When she left, she looked defeated in a way I'd never seen before. And I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. The next morning, Judith sent me a single email. Subject ready. Attached was a draft report. Clean, comprehensive, unemotional, irrefutable. I stared at the screen and realized something profound. Revenge isn't about making someone suffer. It's about removing their ability to pretend. And I was done pretending. The quiet daughter they underestimated was gone. What stood in her place was someone who understood power timing and truth. And soon so would they. The report changed everything. Not because it was dramatic. Not because it accused anyone in bold language or threatened immediate consequences. But because it was calm, clinical, written in the kind of tone that doesn't ask for permission or sympathy. Facts don't need either. I read it 3 times that morning, sitting at my kitchen counter with untouched coffee growing cold beside me. Every line felt heavier than the last. Dates, amounts, entities, connections, patterns. Judith had stripped emotion out of it completely. What remained was truth. And truth, once documented properly, has momentum. At 9 that morning, my phone rang. Evan. I didn't answer. At 9:15, Claire texted. Call me now, this is getting out of hand. I muted the conversation. At 10, my father called. I let it ring twice before answering. We need to talk, he said, his voice tight. I know, I replied. So do the attorneys. There was a pause. What attorneys? The ones Evan didn't think about, I said calmly. He inhaled sharply. You went behind our backs. No, I corrected. I stepped out from under them. By noon, the first ripple hit. Judith forwarded me an email from a regional bank's compliance department. Routine inquiry, polite language. But the subtext was unmistakable. They'd noticed. When money moves strangely, it doesn't scream. It whispers to the systems designed to listen. And those systems never forget. I was in a meeting at work when Claire barged into the lobby downstairs. My assistant texted me alarmed. Your sister is here. She's demanding to see you. I closed my laptop slowly. Send her up. She stormed into my office like a force of nature, face flushed, eyes blazing. For a moment, I saw the sister I'd grown up with. Then the mask slipped. You blindsided us, she snapped. Do you have any idea what you've done? I gestured to the chair across from me. Sit. She didn't. Evan's accounts are frozen. I nodded. That's how reviews work. You told someone she accused. I told the truth, I replied. She slammed her hand on my desk. You're destroying everything. I met her gaze. You destroyed it when you decided I didn't matter. Her voice cracked. We're family. I leaned back. Family doesn't steal quietly and call it management. She looked away, blinking rapidly. It wasn't supposed to go like this. That sentence told me everything. Not that it was wrong. That it failed. You thought you'd be in control, I said. You thought Mom and Dad would shield you. You thought I'd stay quiet. She whispered, you always did. I stood. Not anymore. She finally sat, shoulders sagging. What do you want? The same question. Again. I want you to stop lying, I said. To them, to yourself. Her laugh was hollow. It's too late. She was right. By that afternoon, my mother's charity board chair called her to discuss optics. A phrase my mother used to love until it was aimed at her. My father's firm quietly placed him on leave pending review. Not because he'd done anything illegal, but because proximity matters when smoke appears. That night, my parents asked me to come over. I almost didn't, but closure requires witnesses. The house felt different when I walked in. Smaller, less certain. The walls were lined with photos of milestones I barely remembered being part of. My mother sat rigid on the couch. My father stood by the window. Evan wasn't there. Good. This has gone too far, my mother said immediately. Banks, lawyers, people are talking. Yes, I said, they are. You did this, she accused. I revealed it, I corrected. My father turned. Why didn't you come to us? I looked at him. I did. For years. You just didn't hear me. Silence stretched. My mother's voice softened. We never meant for you to feel left out. I held her gaze. Intent doesn't erase impact. She flinched. Evan is in trouble, my father said quietly. Yes, he could lose everything. I nodded. So could you, if this continues. My mother stood abruptly. You're threatening us now. I stayed seated. I'm stating reality. She paced the room. You think you're better than us. No, I said. I think I see you clearly. She stopped. Then what happens next? I took a breath. This goes one of two ways, I said. You cooperate fully. You stop defending behavior that will take you down with it. Or the systems finish what they started. My father looked exhausted. You'd really let that happen? I didn't answer immediately. Then honestly, yes. The word landed hard, not because it was cruel, because it was final. That was the moment they realized something had shifted permanently. They couldn't appeal to my loyalty anymore. They'd spent it. Later that night, alone in my condo, I felt the weight of it all settle in. My hands trembled slightly as I poured a glass of water. This wasn't victory. This was loss layered with clarity. I grieved the family I'd wanted, the parents I thought might choose differently if given enough time, the sister I hoped would one day see me as an equal. But grief no longer controlled my choices. The next morning, Judith called. Evan's legal team reached out, she said. They want to talk. I smiled faintly. Of course they do. This is the phase where they bargain, she continued. Then deny, then blame. And then I asked. Then consequences. I hung up and looked out my window at the city, waking up indifferent to my family's collapse. For the first time, I understood something deeply. Revenge isn't loud, it isn't messy, it doesn't gloat. It waits, it documents, and when it moves, it doesn't miss. They thought I was reacting. What they didn't see was that the story had already turned against them, and there was no way to edit the ending anymore. The offer came 2 days later. Not directly, not honestly, and definitely not with an apology. Judith called just after dawn. Her voice was calm, but I'd learned by then that calm from her usually meant something was about to surface. Evan's attorney requested a private meeting, she said. Off the record, no paper trail. He says it's about resolution. I laughed softly, staring out at the pale morning light creeping between buildings. Resolution for who? That's the question, she replied. Do you want to hear it? Yes, I said, but not alone. We met that afternoon in a glass-walled conference room at a neutral office building downtown. No family photos, no personal touches, just polished wood-bottled water and the kind of silence designed to intimidate. Evan's attorney arrived first, mid-40s, perfect suit, smile trained to disarm. Then Evan walked in. He looked different, not disheveled, not desperate, just smaller, like someone who had finally realized the ground under his feet wasn't solid. He nodded at me. Thanks for coming. I didn't respond. We sat. His attorney spoke first. Let's be clear, we're not here to argue facts. Judith raised an eyebrow. Good, he continued. We're here to discuss a path forward that minimizes damage for everyone involved. There it was. Minimize damage. Evan leaned forward. This got bigger than it needed to. I looked at him. You made it bigger the moment you assumed no one was watching. He exhaled sharply. Mistakes were made. Judith didn't flinch. Fraud isn't a mistake. The attorney cleared his throat. Let's not get stuck on language. I smiled faintly. Language is all you have left. Evan shot me a look. You don't understand the pressure I was under. I met his gaze. You don't understand what pressure actually is. He opened his mouth, then closed it. His attorney slid a folder across the table toward me. A proposal, he said. In exchange for your cooperation in de-escalating the investigation, Evan is prepared to step back from all financial involvement. The trust will be dissolved, assets returned, quietly. Quietly. And in return I asked. He hesitated. You agree not to pursue further action. Judith leaned back. You're asking her to protect you. Evan looked at me. I'm asking you to end this. I didn't touch the folder. You're asking me to lie. His jaw tightened. You're tearing apart a family. I tilted my head. You exploited one. Silence fell. The attorney tried again. Think about your parents. Public scrutiny would devastate them. I finally picked up the folder. Not to read it, just to feel its weight. You're right, I said. It would. Evan's shoulders relaxed slightly. But here's the problem, I continued. You think my priority is their comfort. I slid the folder back untouched. It's not. Evan's voice rose. So you're just going to burn everything down? No, I said calmly. You already lit the match. I'm just not stepping on it for you. His attorney stiffened. This is your last chance to resolve this amicably. I looked directly at Evan. You don't get to decide what amicable looks like. Judith stood. We're done here. As we walked out, Evan called after me. You think you're winning? I stopped and turned. I think I already did, I said. You just haven't caught up yet. Outside, the city buzzed with late afternoon energy. People hurried past, unaware that a family was quietly collapsing under the weight of its own choices. In the car, Judith glanced at me. That was the right call. I know, I said, but it doesn't make it easier. No, she agreed. It makes it final. That evening, my father called. His voice sounded older than I remembered. They offered to make it go away, he said. Yes. You said no. Yes. He was quiet for a long moment. Why? I closed my eyes. Because if I say yes, this never really ends, it just hides. He sighed. Your mother thinks you're punishing us. I swallowed. I'm protecting myself. And us. I hesitated. I tried. That was the truth. Later that night, my mother left a voicemail. Long, emotional, full of memories and warnings and guilt wrapped in nostalgia. I didn't delete it. I didn't save it either. The next morning, headlines began to shift. Nothing explosive, just subtle changes. Words like inquiry, review, oversight. Evan's name appeared nowhere. Yet, Claire texted me just once. You could have stopped this. I replied. So could you. Hours later, Judith forwarded me an update. The compliance review escalated, federal level. I exhaled slowly. This was the point of no return. I stood by my window watching the sun set, casting the city in gold and shadow. I felt tired in a way that reached my bones, but beneath it was something else. Relief. Not because they were suffering, but because the truth no longer depended on me carrying it alone. For years I'd been the quiet one, the buffer, the one who smoothed things over so no one else had to feel uncomfortable. Now the discomfort belonged to the people who earned it. And tomorrow, when the next shoe dropped, there would be no offer left to make. Only consequences. And for the first time in my life, I was ready to let them land. The knock came before sunrise. Not at my door, at my parents'. I didn't know that yet. I was standing in my kitchen barefoot on cold tile watching the coffee brew when my phone lit up with Claire's name. She never called this early unless something was wrong. I let it ring. She called again, then a third time. I answered on the fourth. Her voice was shrill, stripped of polish. They're here! I leaned against the counter. Who's they? You know who she snapped, then broke. They're asking questions. About Evan. About the accounts. I closed my eyes. So it had begun. When I asked, just now, at Mom and Dad's, 2 men, badges. The word hung between us. Badges. I felt a flicker of something in my chest. Not triumph, not fear. A strange hollow calm. I told you this would happen, I said quietly. You did this, she cried. You could have stopped it. No, I replied. I could have delayed it. She sobbed, breath hitching. Mom's losing it. Dad can barely speak. I waited. I needed to hear the rest. They want statements, she whispered. They want records. They want everything. I pictured my parents' living room. The carefully chosen furniture. The family photos arranged just so. Order meeting intrusion. Claire, I said, listen to me. She sniffed. What? Don't lie, I said. Not now, not anymore. She was silent. They already know more than you think, I continued. Lying will only make it worse. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Evan says they're bluffing. I laughed softly. They never bluff. The call ended abruptly. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the steam rising from my mug, feeling the weight of inevitability settle in. By mid-morning, Judith called. It's official, she said. Search warrants executed, devices seized. I sank into a chair. At my parents' house. Yes. And Evan. His office, his car, his phone. I exhaled slowly. What about my parents? They're witnesses. For now. For now. That afternoon, I went to work. Not because I had to. Because I refused to hide. The office buzzed with rumors I pretended not to hear. My assistant avoided my eyes. My colleagues smiled too carefully. At lunch, my father called. I stepped into an empty conference room before answering. They came to the house, he said, voice shaking. They went through everything. I know. You told them he accused. I didn't have to, I replied. The systems did. He sank into silence. I tried to protect you, he said finally. I know, I replied. You just protected the wrong people. His breath hitched. Your mother hasn't stopped crying. I closed my eyes. I'm sorry. He sounded surprised. You are? Yes, I said. That this is how you're learning. He didn't respond. I need to ask you something, he said after a moment. Did you ever think about how this would end? I thought of the younger version of myself. The one who swallowed disappointment and called it maturity. The one who believed love meant enduring imbalance quietly. Yes, I said. I just didn't think it would take this long. That evening, my mother called. Her voice was brittle. Come over. I hesitated. Is Evan there? No, she snapped. He's gone. Gone. I arrived an hour later. The house looked the same from the outside. Inside, it felt stripped bare. Papers stacked on the dining table, drawers left open, the scent of disinfectant lingering. My mother sat rigid on the couch. My father looked years older. Claire stood near the window, arms crossed tightly over her chest. No one spoke at first. Then my mother turned to me, eyes wild. Are you happy now? I didn't sit. This isn't about happiness. You destroyed us, she said. I shook my head. You handed the match to someone who didn't care if you burned. She stood abruptly. We trusted him. You trusted him because he wasn't me, I said softly. That stopped her. Claire scoffed. This is all so convenient for you. I looked at her. Nothing about this is convenient. My father finally spoke. They think Evan planned this from the start. I nodded. He did. And you knew, he said. I suspected, I corrected. I confirmed. My mother pressed her hands to her temples. Why didn't you tell us sooner? I took a breath. I did. You just didn't hear it because it wasn't coming from Claire. Silence fell heavy. Claire's voice cracked. He said it was just temporary, that we'd fix it later. I met her gaze. He counted on you wanting to believe that. She slid down into a chair, shoulders shaking. I didn't think he'd risk everything. He didn't, I said. He risked you. My mother let out a sob that sounded more like rage. You think you're so righteous? No, I said. I think I finally stopped lying to myself. My father looked at me with something like awe and grief tangled together. When did you become like this? I answered honestly. When I realized no one was coming to save me. That night I left before the conversation turned into something uglier. At home I sat in the dark, phone buzzing constantly. Missed calls, messages, none I wanted to answer. Judith texted once. This will accelerate. I replied. I know. The next morning the story broke. Not with names, not yet, but with phrases that made my stomach tighten. Regional financial misconduct investigation, family trust under review, advisor implicated. Claire's social media went dark. My mother's charity page disappeared overnight. Evan's firm quietly removed his bio. I stood by my window watching the city move, indifferent and relentless. This was the part no one prepared you for. Not the confrontation, not the exposure, but the moment when silence returns and you're left with the truth of what it cost. I wasn't the villain they wanted. I was the consequence they'd ignored. And as the day unfolded, one thing became painfully clear. This wasn't just the collapse of their story. It was the beginning of mine. By the time the lawyers stopped calling, the silence felt unnatural. Not peaceful, not calm, vacant. I learned quickly that once institutions take over, families lose their illusion of control. Conversations become careful, words turn legal, everyone starts speaking as if a microphone might be hidden in the room, including my parents. 3 days after the investigation went public, my father asked to meet me again. Not at the house, not in his office. A small park near the river where we used to walk when I was a teenager, and he needed quiet. He arrived early, sitting on a bench with his hands folded, staring at the water. When he saw me, he stood too quickly, like he wasn't sure what role he was supposed to play anymore. We didn't hug. We sat. They want statements, he said without looking at me. Formal ones. I nodded. They'll want consistency. He flinched at the word. They're asking about Evan, he continued. About when we first trusted him. About what we knew. And I asked? He finally turned to me. They think we enabled him. I met his gaze. You did. His shoulders sagged. We didn't know. You knew enough, I replied gently. You just didn't want to look. He stared at the water, eyes wet. Your mother can't handle this. I exhaled slowly. I know. She keeps saying if you'd just agreed to that deal, he said, none of this would have happened. I didn't react. That's what hurts the most, he went on. She thinks this is revenge. I looked at him. Do you? He hesitated. I don't know what to think anymore. That was the most honest thing he'd said in years. They made another offer, he said quietly. My stomach tightened. Who? Evan's people, he replied. Through intermediaries. I waited. They're willing to cooperate, he said. Return funds. Testify. If certain things disappear. I laughed softly, the sound hollow in my chest. Disappear how? Your involvement, he said. Your report. Your name. I leaned back on the bench. There it was. The real trade. They want to rewrite the story, I said. They want to survive, he corrected. I turned to him. And what do you want? He closed his eyes. I want this to stop. I nodded. So did I. For a very long time. He looked at me, then really looked like he was seeing the cost etched into my face. They're offering to make you whole, he said. Financially. Quietly. I shook my head. They can't pay for what they took. People will get hurt, he warned. They already did, I replied. He swallowed. Your mother thinks if you refuse, you're choosing punishment over peace. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. Peace built on lies is just deferred damage. He rubbed his face with both hands. You've changed. Yes, I said. I had to. He looked at me with something like regret. When did we lose you? I answered without anger. When you decided I was strong enough to lose. We sat in silence after that, the river moving steadily beside us, uncaring. That night, Claire showed up at my condo. She didn't knock. She rang the bell until I answered. Her eyes were red, her voice raw. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. Evan's talking, she said immediately. To everyone. I stepped aside. Come in. She paced as soon as the door closed. He says he'll give them everything if they protect him. I leaned against the wall. They can't. She laughed hysterically. He thinks they can. She stopped pacing and faced me. They want me to talk too. I studied her. About what? About you, she whispered. They think you planned this. I felt a familiar ache. Not surprise, recognition. What are you going to tell them? I asked. She hesitated. The truth. I nodded. That would be new. She winced. I didn't know how deep it was. You knew enough, I said softly. She dropped onto the couch. He says if I don't help him, he'll drag us all down. I met her eyes. He already is. Tears spilled over. I never meant for it to go this far. I sat across from her. Intent doesn't stop consequences. She wiped her face angrily. You always say that. Because it's true. She looked up. They're offering you money. Yes. And you said no. Yes. Why? She asked, genuinely confused. You could walk away from this. Be free. I held her gaze. Freedom isn't silence, it's alignment. She stared at me like I'd spoken another language. You think this makes you better than us? She said. I shook my head. No, I think it finally makes me honest. She stood slowly. If you keep pushing, Mom might break. I felt that familiar pull. The old reflex to protect, to cushion, to sacrifice. I resisted it. She built this world, I said. She doesn't get to ask me to absorb it collapsing. Claire's voice dropped. You really won't stop. I answered without hesitation, no. She left without another word. The next morning, Judith called. They're floating immunity deals, she said. Partial ones. For who? I asked. For people willing to redirect blame. I smiled grimly. Let me guess. Me. Yes. I closed my eyes, then it started. This is the phase where narratives fracture, Judith said. People trade truth for survival. And what do? You stay consistent, she replied. Truth holds. Lies compete. By afternoon, my inbox filled with messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. Old friends, distant relatives, vague concern wrapped in curiosity. I ignored them all. That evening, I sat alone, city lights flickering beyond the glass, and allowed myself to feel something I'd been pushing aside. Fear, not of consequences, of clarity. Because once the truth is fully visible, there's no going back to the comfort of denial. They were trying to bargain with reality. I wasn't. And tomorrow, when the next move came, I knew exactly where I stood. Not above them, not against them, but finally, unmistakably on my own side. The first headline used my name. Not Evans, not the firm, mine. I saw it while waiting for my coffee at the corner cafe, the television mounted above the counter flashing muted news. A woman's face filled the screen. Mine. Pulled from a conference photo taken years ago, cropped just enough to make me look severe. Family whistleblower or mastermind, the banner read. I felt something settle in my chest, not shock, recognition. This was always coming. When systems begin to crack, the easiest way to slow the collapse is to redirect blame. Not toward the architect of the damage, but toward the person who exposed it. I paid for my coffee and left without watching the rest. By the time I reached my office, my phone was vibrating nonstop. Messages from coworkers, from acquaintances, from people who suddenly remembered I existed. Judith called before I could sit down. They're shifting strategy, she said, public pressure. I closed my door. They're framing me. Yes, she replied. Carefully. No lies, just implication. That was the dangerous part. You don't need falsehoods to destroy someone's credibility. You just need enough truth arranged dishonestly. By noon, the story was everywhere. Anonymous sources claiming I'd held a grudge for years. Suggestions that I manipulated access to information. Whispers that I'd orchestrated the investigation to punish my family for excluding me financially. Excluded, inheritance, betrayal. Every keyword designed to make my motives look personal, not principled. Claire texted me a link. This is getting ugly. I didn't reply. An hour later, my mother called. I answered this time. Her voice was sharp, panicked. Have you seen what they're saying? Yes. They're painting you as unstable, she said. As vindictive. I closed my eyes. They're painting a woman who refused to stay quiet. You should make a statement, she urged. Deny it. Say you were emotional. I opened my eyes. No. She sucked in a breath. If you don't control this, they will. They already are, I replied. I'm not playing. She snapped, you're enjoying this. That hurt more than I expected. I'm enduring it, I said evenly. There's a difference. She went silent, then said quietly, your father thinks you should step back. I laughed once. From what? From the narrative, she said. Let the lawyers handle it. Let it die down. I leaned against my desk. If I step back now, it confirms everything they're implying. She hesitated. People don't need to know everything. They already know enough, I replied. And hiding won't change that. She whispered, "You're sacrificing yourself." I answered honestly, "I stopped sacrificing myself years ago, you just didn't notice." She hung up. By late afternoon, the board at my company requested an emergency meeting. Not hostile, just cautious. The kind of caution that shows up when reputations feel threatened by proximity. We sat around the long table, faces careful. "We support transparency," the chair began, "but we need reassurance this won't affect operations." I nodded. "It won't." A man across from me cleared his throat. "The press is framing this as a family dispute." "It isn't," I said. "It's a financial one." "Public perception matters," another added. "Yes," I replied, "and so does precedent." They exchanged glances. "If we distance ourselves," the chair said gently, temporarily. "You don't need to," I interrupted, "but I won't stop you." The room stilled. "I'm not asking for protection," I continued. "I'm asking for time, and the freedom to let facts speak." Silence. Then the chair nodded. "We'll monitor." That was as much as I'd get. On my way home, my phone buzzed again. A number I didn't recognize. I answered. "Miss Harper," a man said. Calm, professional. "This is Assistant U.S. Attorney Keller." My pulse steadied. "Yes." "We're aware of recent media coverage," he continued, "and potential attempts to discredit you." I waited. "We want to be clear," he said. "Your documentation stands. Your cooperation has been consistent. This noise doesn't change that." I exhaled slowly. "Thank you." "There's one more thing," he added. "They may attempt to provoke you into an emotional response." I smiled faintly. "They already have." "Don't give them one," he advised. "I won't," I said. "I don't need to." That evening, Claire showed up again. She looked furious this time. Not broken, not afraid, angry. "They're throwing you under the bus," she said. "Evan's attorney fed that story." I shrugged. "Of course he did." She paced. "He says you planned this for years." I met her gaze. "I planned to survive." She scoffed. "You're letting them ruin your name." I stood. "They're revealing it." She stopped. "If you'd just taken the deal." "I'd be complicit," I cut in. She crossed her arms. "You think the truth will save you?" I nodded. "It already has." She stared at me, something like doubt flickering behind her eyes. "You're not scared," I answered quietly. "I'm done being afraid of people who only have power when I stay silent." She left without slamming the door this time. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the city breathe. I felt the weight of the story pressing in from all sides. This was the cost. Not money, not family approval. Reputation. They were trying to turn me into the villain because villains are easier to dismiss than systems. But villains don't document for years. Villains don't refuse immunity. Villains don't sit quietly while the truth dismantles their own protection. I wasn't their villain. I was their mirror. And tomorrow, when the next article dropped, when the next accusation surfaced, I would do what I'd done from the beginning. Nothing flashy, nothing reactive. I would let the truth keep moving forward. Because in the end, noise burns out. Facts don't. The night before everything collapsed, I slept better than I had in weeks. That surprised me. The headlines were still ugly. My name still dragged through speculation and half-truths. Friends still didn't know what to say. My parents still weren't speaking to me unless it was through clipped, careful messages. But something inside me had gone quiet. Not numb, resolved. When you stop needing people to understand you, their misunderstandings lose their power. I woke before sunrise, the sky pale and still, and checked my phone out of habit. No new messages, no missed calls, just a single email notification that made my chest tighten. From Judith. Subject: "It's happening." I didn't rush. I showered, I dressed, I made coffee, I let myself breathe. Because whatever was coming, I wasn't going to meet it panicked. By the time I arrived at work, the building felt different. Conversations hushed when I passed. Screens flickered with news feeds no one wanted to acknowledge openly. At 9:30, the alert hit. Federal charges filed against financial advisor Evan Morrison. Conspiracy, wire fraud, misappropriation of funds. My name wasn't in the headline. That mattered more than I expected. Judith called moments later. "The indictment dropped this morning. They have enough to move forward without cooperation deals." I closed my eyes. "So it's done." "It's begun," she corrected. "Trials take time, but the narrative just changed." It had. Within an hour, the tone of coverage shifted. The careful implications about my motives disappeared, replaced by concrete facts, dates, transfers, testimony, patterns that no amount of spin could soften. Evan's face appeared on screens now, not mine. Claire called at 10:15. I let it ring. She called again. I answered on the third. "They arrested him," she said, her voice flat, like she was reporting the weather. "Yes." She was quiet for a long moment. "He didn't tell me it was that bad." I swallowed. "He didn't tell you the truth." She exhaled shakily. Mom fainted when she heard. I closed my eyes briefly. Is she okay? Yes, Claire said, but she keeps asking for you. I hesitated. I'll come later. Claire's voice cracked. They're saying I might be questioned. That's likely, I replied. Be honest. She laughed bitterly. You always say that like it's easy. It's not, I said. It's just necessary. She didn't argue. That afternoon, I received an email from the same assistant U.S. attorney. Your continued cooperation is appreciated. You are not a subject of this investigation. I stared at the words longer than I needed to. Not a subject? I hadn't realized how tightly I'd been holding my breath. By early evening, my mother called again. This time, her voice was hollow. Come home, she said. Please. I drove there as the sun dipped low, painting the street in long shadows. The house looked unchanged from the outside, but inside it felt like a place after a storm. My mother sat on the couch wrapped in a blanket. My father stood near the fireplace, hands clasped behind his back. Claire sat on the floor staring at nothing. They all looked up when I entered. No accusations, no anger, just exhaustion. My mother's eyes filled with tears immediately. I didn't know, she whispered. I set my bag down slowly, I know. She shook her head. I trusted him. Yes, I said, you did. My father cleared his throat. They're saying Claire may have to testify. Claire flinched. I will, she said quickly. I'll tell them everything. I nodded. That's the right choice. She looked at me, then really looked like she was seeing me without the roles we'd been trapped in for years. I didn't think you'd survive this, she said quietly. I met her gaze. I didn't either. My mother reached for my hand, tentative. Why didn't you stop when we asked? I didn't pull away. Because stopping would have meant lying. She squeezed my fingers, tears spilling freely now. I thought you were punishing us. I shook my head. I was protecting myself. My father finally spoke. We failed you. The words landed heavier than any accusation ever could. Yes, I said softly, you did. He nodded, eyes shining. I see that now. We sat in silence after that. Not comfortable, not healed, but honest. Later, as I stood to leave, my mother said, they'll never forgive you for this. I paused at the door. I didn't do this to be forgiven. I drove home through streets that felt strangely unfamiliar, like I was seeing my city for the first time without a filter. That night, another headline appeared. Key witness cooperates in financial fraud case. Claire's name, not mine. I sat on my couch, lights off, watching the glow of the city outside my window. I felt something loosen inside my chest, something that had been knotted for years. They had tried to make me the villain. They had tried to trade truth for silence. They had tried to break me with guilt and fear. And in the end, it wasn't my anger that won. It was my refusal to lie. Tomorrow would bring fallout. Trials, long consequences, a family that would never be the same. But tonight, for the first time since all of this began, I allowed myself to feel something close to peace. They were broken now, not because I shattered them, but because the truth finally stood where their lies had been. And it didn't move. The house went quiet after I left. Not the comforting kind of quiet, the kind that echoes, the kind that makes you aware of every choice you didn't make sooner. I didn't go home right away. I drove without direction, letting the city blur past lights streaking like unfinished thoughts. For years, movement had been my way of avoiding stillness. Stillness forced reflection, and reflection demanded honesty. Tonight, honesty didn't scare me. I pulled over near the river, just as the sky deepened into indigo. The water moved steadily, indifferent to everything that had happened to indictments and headlines and the small private wars inside living rooms. I sat on the hood of my car and breathed. This was the part no one talks about. Not the exposure, not the reckoning, but the aftermath. When the adrenaline fades, when the villain has been named, when the story moves on without asking whether you're ready for the silence it leaves behind. I thought about the girl I used to be. The one who learned early that love came with conditions. The one who stayed quiet to stay included. The one who believed endurance was the same as strength. She'd gotten me this far, but she couldn't take me any further. The weeks that followed passed slowly, deliberately. Investigations became proceedings. Proceedings became schedules. Schedules became waiting. Claire cooperated fully. Evan disappeared into a process that stripped him of his confidence piece by piece. My parents withdrew from public life. Charity boards replaced them quietly. Friends stopped calling. The image they'd worked so hard to curate dissolved under scrutiny. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt clarity. At work, the board issued a statement of support, carefully worded, legally sound. They offered me the option to take leave. I declined. Not because I wanted to prove anything, but because I was done letting other people's choices interrupt my own life. Colleagues treated me differently now, some with admiration, some with caution, some with the kind of distance reserved for people who remind you of uncomfortable truths. I didn't mind. One afternoon, weeks later, my father called. Not to discuss the case, not to ask for help, just to talk. We met again by the river. He looked older, smaller, but clearer in a way I hadn't seen before. I keep thinking about what you said, he admitted. About protecting the wrong people. I nodded. It's easier than admitting you made a mistake. He sighed. I thought keeping peace was love. I looked at him. Love without accountability is just avoidance. He didn't argue. I don't expect forgiveness, he said quietly. I'm not offering it, I replied honestly. Not yet. He accepted that. Claire sent me a letter. Not an email, not a text, a letter. She didn't ask for forgiveness either. She didn't justify herself. She didn't blame Evan or our parents. She wrote, I thought being chosen meant I was worthy. I didn't realize how much I'd given up to stay chosen. I folded the letter and put it in a drawer. Not to revisit, just to acknowledge. My mother didn't write. That too was information. One morning, months later, I woke up and realized something strange. I wasn't angry anymore. Not because everything was resolved. Not because wounds had healed. But because I'd stopped arguing with reality. I took a long walk that day. No phone. No destination. Just movement and air. I passed families, couples, strangers, living lives that had nothing to do with mine. For the first time, I didn't feel invisible among them. I felt separate and free. Revenge had never been my goal, not really. What I wanted was to stop shrinking, to stop being the one who absorbed harm quietly so others could stay comfortable, to stop mistaking silence for maturity. What I learned was this. The most powerful thing you can do to people who underestimate you is to outgrow the role they assigned you. They tried to make me the villain. They tried to trade truth for silence. They tried to preserve an image by sacrificing the person who saw through it. They failed. Not because I fought louder, not because I struck back harder, but because I refused to lie. The story didn't end with reconciliation. It didn't end with forgiveness. It didn't end with applause. It ended with alignment, with a woman who finally chose herself without apology. If you're listening to this, and you've ever been the quiet one, the overlooked one, the one told you were strong enough to endure neglect, remember this. Strength is not endurance. Strength is choice. And choosing yourself doesn't make you cruel. It makes you honest. If this story resonated with you, if you've lived through family betrayal, quiet injustice, or the moment you realized staying silent was costing you everything, share your story in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, stories about justice, karma, and the moment the tables finally turn, like and subscribe, because legacy isn't what you inherit, it's what you refuse to let destroy you.